Jamie is trying to help us all meet a deadline for an exciting funding opportunity. And so we want to welcome you, each and every one, to this edition of the South Carolina Livable Streets Academy. Okay, Amy, are you ready to take it away?
I am. How do I control this thing here? Or do you just want to flip through for me?
Sure, I can flip through for you, no problem.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. So again, Jamie Kendrick from Mead Hunt. Could folks do me a favor, just so I know who I'm chatting with, and just type into the chat function what your organization is. That will help me to tailor this real quick while we're getting this up and together here. So I've been working with a number of counties, municipalities. Can you see me, by the way? So I can't see myself.
So Jamie, I hate to interrupt you real quick, but so as folks are putting in where they're from in the chat, and thank you, Jamie, for that prompt, I want to quickly remind folks what the Livable Streets Academy is. So this is the third webinar that we've had, and we are this is a program of the Palmetto Cycling Coalition. Joanne and myself, and my name is Amy Johnson-Ely. So Joanne Burkett and myself are staff members, and we are putting on this academy to bring content through probably monthly series of presenters, focusing this year on funding and trying to make all the available funding streams as accessible as possible to every city, county, region within the state of South Carolina. And Jamie was presented at the South Carolina Bike Walk Trails Summit a few weeks ago now in Newberry, South Carolina, and did his focus. We pulled him in from Mead Hunt, a national consulting company, but he's out of Baltimore. We pulled him in because of his expertise with Safe Streets for All federal funding program opportunity. And so he is going to talk about that today. So go ahead, Jamie. Sorry.
All right, great. Excuse me. Thanks for those who have put their organization in. It's good to see both private and public sector folks on here. And for private sector folks, depending on where you are situated, while you cannot apply directly, you can benefit if you have an applicant partner. So don't despair here. And then, yep. So anyway, so I can't see myself. So can I be seen, Amy?
You sure can. We can see you. Okay,
great. Thank you. I'm not used to Zoom. I use Teams most of the time. Anyway, so I've been working with a number of clients across the country on USDOT Safe Streets for All programs. And we were very successful in the first round of the program, which was announced. The awards were announced back in January. Helped our clients win about $10.5 million. But setting aside the business development perspective, one of the things that we've found is that local governments, especially much smaller local governments, really kind of get lost when they see notices of funding opportunity from the Federal Transit Administration, Highway Administration, USDOT, and the NOFO, as we call it, is about 40 pages long. And you really have to scroll through to get down to like the 1 or 2 pages that really matter. So we've been helping to kind of demystify some of that for a lot of our local government clients. And what's probably more ironic is that they'll send out a 40-page notice of funding opportunity, but for this grant in particular, for planning efforts, it's a 2-page response. So leave it to our federal partners to make it, easy to access. Excuse me. So let me just start and talk about South Carolina, and you may know this, so if I can get the first slide. These are not things, or the next slide, please. These are not things that you want to rank high in, but South Carolina ranks first nationally in the number of traffic deaths per million vehicle miles traveled. You rank, next slide, second in deaths per 100,000 residents. So when it comes to categories that are not places you want to be, you are racking up the wins, and we don't want that to be anymore, right? Next slide. But wait, there's more. Pedestrian deaths, you all are fighting above your weight. as they say. 23rd, you're 23rd in population with 190 deaths, but 10th in the country in terms of pedestrian deaths, the absolute number of pedestrian deaths. So you rank above, I believe, Texas, for example, in your pedestrian deaths, despite them being, I think, 8.5 times the size of you. And then finally, one more very not so great statistic, if I recall correctly. Next slide. Yep, not so great statistic here that on the USDOT Safe Streets for All program that we're going to talk about, South Carolina, despite its very disturbing safety picture, ranked 44th out of all the states per capita in terms of your Safe Streets for All funding grants. There was, I don't believe there were any implementation grants in South Carolina, which is the money that's really used to make improvements, obviously. There were a half a dozen, I believe, planning grants. We helped Batesburg-Leesville to do their grant, a small town, 10,000 people or so, was one of the awardees. And we're helping 2 or 3 others this time around. So next slide, please. So here's the top lines on the program. This is my favorite part. As a former city transportation official, state DOTs are not always my friend. And so this is a program for which only local governments are eligible, and they can subgrant funds to nonprofit and private actors as well. There is $577 million, at the risk of reading all of this to you, available. Last year, that number was $400 million for planning and demonstration activities. This year, it's larger because they left $177 million on the table, which is part of why I'm doing this outreach today. There is money to be had from the federal government for planning and demonstration activities. 100% of the applicants last year were awarded planning grants. So I refer to this as having to fog up a mirror. That was the standard for winning an award last year on the planning and demonstration side. And I like to tell people that 100% of my clients won, but that's not really fair because 100% of all clients won these applications. Now, the implementation grants are a little more competitive. 1 in 5 applicants won, and it was for anything from safe routes to transit, to safe routes to parks, to road diets, to major intersection improvements. USDOT likes to see a program of projects being implemented rather than fix this intersection, build this sidewalk segment. They want to see larger, more impactful projects that are programmatic in nature. On the planning and demonstration side, I'll talk about some activities in a second. You do not have to control in their entirety the roads. So I understand South Carolina, most of the roads end up being SCDOT owned. You do not have to have their permission to apply for this grant. You can, and as a matter of fact, I would encourage local governments to be applying for this grant so that you have something you can take to SCDOT and say, here's our plan for safety in pick your town or county, right? We would like your help in implementing these things. These things can be, very small, road diets, or it could be major intersection improvements or major sidewalk projects. But having that plan in hand, does give SCDOT a little bit more clue and impetus as to what it is that's needed in your community. Grantees must provide 20% of the award. So win $1 million or win $1 million project, federal government covers 80% of that, or 800,000. The local provides 20,000. There is no minimum, there is no maximum on the planning grants, which is mostly what I'm going to talk about today. So we saw grants as small as $80,000 on the planning side, and we saw grants as big as 5 million on the planning side last time around. It really depends on what you feel your needs are and what match you can provide. The other nice thing, especially for much smaller communities that are more budget constrained, is that you can use local staff time, you can use volunteer time, excuse me, you can use indirect costs as part of your match. So you can use volunteer time. Did I say that? So if you have 20 volunteers show up to an advisory committee meeting, you log their hours, and there's some formula that is used to count their time towards the match. So if you were to ask for $125,000 grant, let's say, you could probably come up with half of the match just in terms of staff and volunteer time, if not more, which makes the bar even lower to applying here. Let's see. Oh, the other good thing here is that typical US DOT rules for procurement and other administrative elements do not apply. You are generally speaking allowed to follow your own local government procurement procedures. If you've worked with US DOT funds before, this is a big change and a big headache reliever. This is like the Advil of US DOT. This is great. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the action plan and demonstration grants. So last year in the program, they only allowed folks to apply for planning oriented activities. Basically, you're producing a planning document, lots of data analysis, lots of strategy development, etc. You can still do that this year, but you can also marry that with a pot of money that you would have to actually start implementing certain things as demonstration projects. So I'll take an example of one of the communities we're working in, has never done a road diet before. Now, road diets are not expensive, but they do require a little bit of money for these posts and some paint and other things. So they are putting in $80,000 for their action plan, and I think $30,000 for demonstration projects. Another community has never used what's called the rapid rectangular flashing beacons before. So they are asking for money to develop their plan and to test out how those beacons work in their community. So you've got an opportunity to both put in money to do your plan as well as to test out some strategies. Typically, you have about 3 years to spend these funds from the time you enter your grant agreement. And there's a lot of other ways that locals are spending this. So one jurisdiction we're working with has been wanting to update their road code for many years. It is very auto-oriented, does not have a lot of provisions requiring sidewalks or crosswalk treatments or any other number of things, street lighting, any other number of things that are helpful to pedestrians. So they are updating their road code. Now that costs some money. It's not a simple, quick effort. So they're using that. They're doing another client's doing a rural road safety, a series of rural road safety audits. They've highlighted 10 projects or 10 roads on their high injury network, and they're going to use some of their planning money to go out and really assess what needs to be done on those rural roads. We have another client that's going to be updating their street lighting policies. Right now they don't allow street lights in the public right of way. They're going to be changing that, but there's a lot of technical pieces that need to be done. So you can use this action plan and demonstration grant money for a huge swath of activities, and I'm happy to talk through what some of those might be. Next slide, please. It's an incredibly simple application process, despite the 40-page notice of funding opportunity. They are giving you templates to fill in for your application. There's about a page worth of narrative that's developed and a budget and a map. This is one that we did in Frederick County, Maryland. They won $795,000 with about 4 pages of work. Now, that said, time is tight. These are due July the 10th this year. On a limited basis, we would be happy to just pull this together for a local government, at our expense. We've developed a pretty quick and rapid turnaround on these applications, so we'd be happy to do that for any local government that's interested. Next slide, please. So I mentioned some of the activities. So Batesburg, Leesville is doing a very basic initial action plan so they can have something to take to SCDOT and say these are the types of improvements that we'd like to see along their major roads. I mentioned Frederick County. They're actually going back in for $1.2 million this year to do some quick build work, to do some road diets, and to do some trail planning in year 2. Even though, frankly, We have not yet signed the grant agreement for round one. It's taking USDOT a little bit of time. Okay, next slide. Implementation grants. So these are more challenging, 15% success rate in 2022. If you've not started putting your implementation grant ready for this year, don't start now. You've got about 15 working days, and these are a lot of work. That said, start to think about it for next year. You have to have a comprehensive safety action plan, though, in order to apply for an implementation grant. You can't just show up and say, hey, we have this great project. They want to see a systematic effort to develop a safety plan and have a project that is tied back to that safety plan. That said, you don't need to have 90% design. You don't need to have all the details worked out. You just need to show a project that is impactful from a safety perspective. And again, they like to see projects that are larger, and I'll talk about the one that's here, for example, and scalable, and also programmatic. So again, not one intersection. This is the one that we're looking at here. This is the Sligo Creek Trail in Montgomery and Prince George's County, Maryland. There are about 30 trail access points, and there have been a tremendous number of serious injuries and fatalities approaching the trail from communities. There's also a major road that runs along that trail. So they applied for $7.5 million for access improvements and safety improvements to 3 different trails in Montgomery County. And again, they won $7.5 million to make those improvements. It is flashing beacons, it is traffic calming devices, it's some mid-block crossings, some missing sidewalk segments, a whole host of activities. We were able to tie it to these communities being disadvantaged communities, about 75% African-American, Latino, and other minority communities in and around the Sligo Creek Trail. So equity is a big consideration for USDOT, as many of you probably know. Next slide. Or is that the last one? So that was the last one. Applications are due July 10th. Happy to take questions or talk about ideas that you may have or ways that we can help you move applications forward if you're interested. Thank you.
Great. So thank you so much, Jamie. I'm going to ask a question or two, and then I would like all the participants to go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and we can go ahead and take those questions. At this point, we're gonna try to manage the questions now. Then we'll probably leave a little more freeform Q&A at the very end. So, Jamie, I just want to make sure that folks heard, and I want to make sure I understood that Mead Hunt has basically done so many of the applications for the first phase, that planning grant application, that you guys are actually willing to front the costs yourselves and do that for free for cities and towns and regions, right?
For the planning grants, yes. I don't know if Haley was able to join us, who's actually pulling all these off. Don't tell her I told you all that we would do more of these. She's pulling out her hair. Yeah, we could take on a few more if you're interested. I think all I would say is that if we do that, we'd like to have a fair chance to get the work on the back end, not a commitment to it, but a fair chance.
So that once once it's awarded, if it's awarded, you guys would get a fair chance to do the work, to develop the plan or the quick build or the policy change. So yeah, I was really impressed that it's not just to create a plan, but it's to create like a working document or a change in a specific policy or like a lighting plan and policy, things like that. So my other question that I want to talk about is the second phase, that implementation grant that you did say is a much more competitive grant to get to actually construct and build out those plans. And what would be, so first of all, I did notice, I want folks to see that it did say that if the locals don't own the road, and in South Carolina, that's often the case, they do have to get an agreement with SCDOT. So I do know that SCDOT.
Just to clarify that, Amy, just to clarify, clarifying?
Oh, no. Yeah, let's go back. I think it said that for the implementation, that's the 5th bullet point, where must own or maintain affected roads or an agreement with the agency that owns the affected roadways. So maybe you can speak to that.
Sure. So, or have safety responsibility. So if your police patrol that road, right, you can apply as if you owned that road. And then the agreement with the owner really comes after the fact. I'm going to assume that if someone on this call got $2 million to make safety improvements along Pick a Road in South Carolina, that SCDOT would find a way to work with you, right? So you don't have to have that agreement up front. I mean, it's good to have a letter of support, et cetera, but you don't have to have that agreement written down and included with your grant application.
Gotcha. Yeah,
Yes,
and the
Brad,
only
thank
thing
you,
I'll
because-
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I guess I was just going to mention that the SCDOT Office of Local Government Services, they just want to kind of be on the up and up for what people are applying for if they are state on road. They just want to know what's happening. So I think that was kind of the only requirement that I had heard. The SCDOT Office of Local Government Services, which you can look up online, Roxanne and Chetta. But anyway, the next question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Joanne, who's monitoring the chat, the questions in the chat, so she can kind of consolidate those questions. So when local governments, when they want to get to the, once they get that planning grant, if, and assuming that it's another easy win again to get that planning grant, when they apply for this implementation grant, what do you see? So that's a much harder lift to put that application together, right? And so do you have any suggestions for where people would get the resources to apply for that implementation grant? Does that typically, is that something that would benefit from the help of a consultant, or is that something that people could do in-house?
I think the answer is both. Just to some extent, a lot of the much larger applications are being put together, by consultants for local governments. It's not a requirement, obviously. It is a fair. I would estimate to put together an implementation grant is probably 20 to 30 hours worth of work. So it's not overly burdensome, but it does require, some level of effort, some level of mapping. I will say for smaller, I would say that the smaller the community, the lower the expectation for a glitzy, glamorous looking application, right?
Okay.
If on this one here that I'm showing on the screen, excuse me, that was, I think it probably cost the jurisdiction about $6,000 or $7,000 to have us put together for them. Probably was again about 30 to 40 hours worth of work
For the implementation grant application.
implementation, correct.
Oh.
But it doesn't have to be that much. As long as you have some basic GIS capabilities and the ability to use Microsoft Word, you can get there. Amy, did you freeze? Or are you reading?
You may have frozen. So let's keep it going here with a couple questions from the chat. Aaron wants to know, to get an implementation funding, you must have a safety plan in place. What does a safety plan entail?
So a safety plan entails, it has 9 different elements. Maybe you can go back a slide or two. It starts with having a leadership commitment. So a public works director, a county commissioner, a mayor, somebody who's going to ultimately kind of be the champion for that project. Number one. Number two, then there's a series of analyses, both crash data as well as policy and program analyses that you do. You develop a high injury network. So where are the 3 or 4 roads that have the highest rates of fatalities and serious injuries? It includes some equity analysis, and then includes your strategies for improvement. They want you to commit to the aspirational goal of 0 deaths by 2040. Obviously, that is aspirational, but there's no, nobody's able to comply with that directly, obviously. But stating the aspiration of we are committed to try and get to zero is what they're looking for.
Got it.
I can certainly share some action plans to have Amy post them if you would be so kind, Amy.
I'm glad to do that. Thank you so much. Couple other questions here. If the volunteer hours can be counted as part of the match, I'm not sure, Justin, you may have to jump on and help me understand who contributes the money that pays for that volunteer service. I think maybe in mind a true volunteer effort. So I'm not sure what you mean there, Justin.
Oh, well, what I'm wondering is like, so if we're putting, let's just say we're putting 20,000, I don't know, dollars worth of volunteer effort towards this project. I mean, presumably, and the USDOT is giving us 80,000. Still, we have to get that 100,000. How does that money come into us? Does that make sense?
Oh, so the way it works is you send. It's a little more confusing in this case. In this case, you would send a bill to USDOT for $100,000. They would send you. You would count it on both the expense side as well as the revenue and the expense side.
Okay, my weakness. Yeah, I think I got it. My weakness as an accountant is showing.
Mine too.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard of other grants that do it that way. So I think you expense $120,000 project. They count your 20,000 volunteer hours and they send you 100. Isn't that how that kind of works?
Yeah. Basically.
Okay. Will this planning funding be available next year as well? You mentioned they had some left over, so we're going forward.
Yep, 400 million per year plus whatever is left over from the prior year.
Got it. For how many years do we know yet?
5. So
5.
This is, excuse me, we're in year 2 right now.
Got it. Okay. Let's get a little bit of clarification too about when you said you are happy to help small governments put together a planning grant. Is there a fee from Mead Hunt for that, or just like you said, just a fair chance to get paid going forward after this application?
Correct. Yep. We're happy to do these implementation grants. They're simple. I mean, they're simple if you know what the requirements are and can follow the 40-page notice of funding opportunity. But I appreciate why in the next 15 days or so, folks would not be able to pull it off, especially if they're not familiar. So we're happy to do those at our expense. You got to let us know, by the end of this week. Otherwise, Haley's going to kill me. In terms of the match, the other thing I would say is we've had some people say, well, I've already gone through my budget cycle for this year. I can't come up with another 15,000 or 50,000 or whatever it is. I would say, don't worry about that. Easy for me to say, right? By the time they make the awards, let's call that, let's see, they're due July 15th. By the time they announce the awards, probably be somewhere around November. By the time they then get everybody in under agreement, it's probably talking March or so. And by the time you actually are spending money, it's, May, June or so. So you're dealing with basically FY20. In local government terms, you're dealing with FY25 money. Yes.
Got it. Good. So would this grant opportunity be open to communities in North Carolina as well? There are some trail projects that traverse both states, and who would take the lead on that, and how might that work for something like the Saluda Grade Trail in Spartanburg County?
Sure. So it can be either local government agency.
Okay.
Yes, North Carolina it's a national program. And I would say that, as I said about disadvantaged communities, they're also looking for good rural projects, right? On the implementation side, that is, that has been something that's been a little harder for them to fulfill.
Got it. Equity for us rural folks. I love hearing that, Jamie. Thank you. Speaking of rural and including in this example, tribal communities, Brad put a link to another DOT grant program in the chat that you might want to click through, because that one has a later application date of August the 14th, and there is no local match requirement. So if you
That's
want
right.
to take a
Actually, this one was announced today.
great.
And yeah, August 21st is the deadline. If there's a good rural trail project, I know that a place in Maryland, there's a rural area, won $21 million in the last round, I believe it was, for a series of road diets and rural trails, a small city on the eastern shore of Maryland. You know, those, again, they're looking for good rural projects. They're looking for good rural bike ped projects. They're not looking for big road projects.
Got it. So talk about the opportunity to fund perhaps a part of the East Coast Greenway through an area that isn't super dangerous as far as the safety data shows, but it is an important link. Is the implementation funding geared more towards those dangerous corridors like US 17, or is this applicable to those connections?
It really is. You're going to fare much better if you can demonstrate a very strong safety nexus. But if you have a segment of the East Coast Greenway, for example, that is heading towards being ready for final design and construction, that rural opportunity that we just talked about is a phenomenal opportunity, and I think would be well received.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Any other questions in the chat, or anybody want to pop on, unmute, start your video? Let's get everybody's questions
Jamie,
answered.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here. Jamie, I've got a question. What would be sort of the top 5 kind of project characterizations that could elevate your chances of getting an implementation grant? So you said rural, and then you said a lot of bike and pedestrian crash data, right?
Economically disadvantaged communities.
Okay.
Which could be either rural or minority or lower income. Right.
So any of those 3.
Any of those 3, if you got a trifecta, you know, that's even better.
Okay. Anything else?
A program of projects. Again, I think they would rather not see one-offs, right? But they would rather see something brought to completion, whether it's, you know, a major trail segment or a series of road diets in a community, or a major ADA compliance project that is citywide in nature or townwide in nature. They want to see programs of projects. So that's 4. Carol Jones. You're going to challenge me on a 5th right now.
Okay.
What else?
All right. Any other questions, guys? I think we've got one more.
Is there a funding source to cover trail design for future ECG acceptance?
East Coast Greenway.
You could use the rural program for that we just talked about.
Okay.
Again, feel free to reach out to us. Happy to help on that one. They're a little bit more involved, but not overly burdensome.
So I wanted to I wanted to kind of touch on and I'm not sure, Jamie, if you recall this, if you do jump in on this, but I wanted to touch on where the 7 planning grants were awarded in South Carolina in the past year. There was an MPO, there was a metropolitan planning organization, then there was a larger rural council of government, and then quite a few small towns. I wondered if you had that top of mind, or if you wanted me to touch on that.
You should do that, because I can't get to my internet right now while I'm talking to you, but
sure.
I know there was something in the Myrtle Beach area.
Yep. So that
Louisville.
right.
You remember
So the
others?
Myrtle Beach Metropolitan Planning Organization, GPATS, I'm sorry, GSATS, Grand Strand Area Transportation Study Area, that got it. Then Low Country Council of Governments, which is Beaufort County area. And then I think it was Batesburg, Leesville. There was also, that's the extent of my memory on this.
West Columbia
Yep.
was one.
Mm-hmm. So the rest of them were small. So I just want to kind of give some confidence to some of the smaller towns that, you know, if you do think that you're highly eligible based on what we've talked about, that, you know, you should go for it.
Yeah. And, you know, I think one of the things here to think about is that a lot of people are, you know, cynical about, oh, federal money and this bipartisan infrastructure law. And, you know, rural areas missing out, or more Republican areas are missing out, or, you know, this community is missing out. This is a high probability win to show that you're bringing some of that money back to, that federal money back to the community, and it can be, you know, put to good use.
All right.
Any-
Any other questions, guys?
If somebody said, can you link to the announcements of awardees? Yep. If you go, we can, but if you go, oh, there we go. Now I can do it. Give me 1 second. I'm going to put, whoops, I'm going to put the entire grant program in the chat. How about that? And you can get to the awardees on the left-hand side of the screen. Okay, somebody beat me to it. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
So again, if you are interested in us helping you out, please let us know in the next, you know, by Friday. Happy to do it. Just want to keep Haley from jumping out the window. And you know, if you didn't get, let me put my info in the chat real quick.
So I just included the action plans awarded and the implementation grants awarded.
No, and actually, let me put a link in a chat to one of the action plans.
So
talking to my-
it looks like City of Aiken, City of Clemson, City of Rock Hill, Low Country Council of Governments is the larger rural area, and the Myrtle Beach metropolitan area GSAT's action plan, and Town of Batesburg, Leesville.
I just put a link into an action plan if somebody wants to see what's involved.
Okay.